Born Grace Smith in 1892 in Sydney, New South Wales, to English parents, she showed from an early age an interest in art, which was fostered by her family. In 1910, she took classes in drawing with Antonio de Tillo Rubo, an influential art teacher in Sydney, credited with introducing a whole generation of artists to modernism. Prior to World War I, Cossington Smith travelled to England, attending classes and becoming most likely exposed to the Camden Town group, including artists like Spencer Gore. Returning to Sydney prior to the outbreak of war, she resumed classes with de Tillo Rubo, this time taking up painting. Her growing interest in post-impressionist painters, most notably Vincent van Gogh, earned her the nickname Mrs. Van Gogh, and resulted in early work like the Sock Knitter, credited as being the first post-impressionist painting in Australia. It was during this time she became further interested in colour theory. Her knowledge of two of her contemporaries, Roland Wakelin and Roy de Maistre, their experiments linking colour and music, was one influence. Probably the bigger influence was Beatrice Irwin's New Science of Colour. Irwin was interested in the connection between colour and emotions, and expressed the view that the study of colour would lead to more subtle emotions, profound ideas, and more quickened spiritual perceptions on a universal level. She was interested in radiating colour, in colour waves, auras, and vibrations, and in the capacity of colour to transform our state of mind. Cossington Smith distilled these ideas for her own use, and it is in her paintings from the 1920s and 30s that we see her most daring use of colour. She also, by this time, had begun to develop her own distinct touch in the way she painted. Using stiff hoghair bright brushes, she covered her canvases with a multitude of short dashes that behave not unlike a Roman mosaic. It is not until you stand back and look at the work as a whole does it make sense. Her use of colour and her mark-making and choice of subject, as well as flattening of the picture plane and abstracted compositions, firmly place her in modernist thinking. Her late paintings, which include her well-known interiors, exemplify this modernist thinking. Cossington Smith exhibited throughout her life, receiving her greatest acclaim later in her career. In 1973, a major retrospective exhibition travelled throughout Australia. From the 1970s onwards, her output declined. Her failing eyesight and fragility prevented her from painting large works. Grace Cossington Smith passed away in 1984. The first thing I want you to do is find an interior in your own home that incorporates a doorway. And I want you to do a tonal drawing like we have done before. So concentrating on lights and darks and masses. Come up with a few different options too. Don't just find one composition and work with it. Like we have in previous weeks, you might have to do a bit of deleting, a little bit of adding, moving things around. But come up with a drawing that you're understanding the changes and the shifts in tone and the shapes of those tonal masses. Transfer your finished design onto a piece of canvas or a piece of paper, depending on what sort of material you're going to work in. And then I want you to do an underpainting using yellows and using them in an analogous way. Once you've established the light-dark pattern using that wedge of the colour wheel, so an analogous colour wheel, or an analogous wedge of the colour wheel, I should say. So in this case, I'm ranging from yellows right through to the red that I used here, burnt sienna. And then variations, so the same yellow with white added to it to make it lighter and darker. And so you could also talk about it as a monochrome, but it's not really quite a monochrome because we are diverging into different hues here. So it's sort of a cross between. So once you've established that, it's now that we're going to do is we're going to play with some of the mark making that Grace Cossington Smith uses. And principally, when we look at her paintings of this period, she's using little dashes of colour over an underpainting like what you've done here. She's using a flat brush. So in this case, the scale of the work that I'm working on, I'm actually going to use, this is a 1/8 of an inch flat. So we're going to be making quite nice little marks, but if you've got something a little bit bigger, that's fine too. Just don't go massive, would be my thought here. So you're looking for a flat brush, and we're making little dashes. Now again, if you look at Cossington Smith's work, is that there's usually the marks are all made in one direction, so they're usually either horizontal or vertical, or there might be a slight diagonal to them, but they're fairly consistent across the whole surface. The other interesting aspect that when we look at these marks that she's making is that they're not overly mixed. So that's going to be your other challenge in terms of your mark making for this exercise, is that I don't want you to be taking colours and mixing them in a space on the palette. I want you to be getting into the habit of picking up colour on your brush. So let's say I just want to make a lighter blue mark. I'm going to pick up white on my brush and I'm going to just touch the blue paint there, and we're going to then paint that down and let it mix. On the surface of the paper. And I want you to just do little dots and dashes like this. You want to leave some of that yellow showing through. So use what you've got down as a guide to what goes down over the top. A lot will depend on what you dip into first. So if you dip into the blue first, for instance, it's going to give a different mark, it's going to be a different intensity. So it's going to be a matter of experimentation to see what works. So this then becomes a very exciting way of mixing your secondary colours. So here we're playing with just lightening a colour, adding white. But let's say we're wanting to mix a violety colour. So violet we usually mix from a blue and a red. So in this case, rather than pulling the violet down onto here, I'm going to dab into my red, and I'm going to dab into my blue, and we're going to then apply them down together like that. And they're shifting and changing. And lots of interesting things are happening. Our marks are becoming quite dynamic. Now this is your opportunity to clean up, change any of the shapes that you wanted to change. But just keep working in those dots and those dashes. You can be thinking about interesting things can also start to happen when you're mixing maybe two complementary colours. So if we're mixing a red and a green, oops, yeah. Soak that up. So if we take a little bit of green onto our brush and touch into the red, you're going to start to get neutrals or maybe really quite dark colours. And then of course if you then dip into white too, which I don't know where I'm going to paint that, so I'm just going to paint that down here, you can start to see beautiful mixes going into sort of greys and things with that mix there. That'd be quite suitable maybe for go into the white quite a bit. So with this you can be quite, you can go off on completely new tangents in terms of introducing colour, in terms of that you might be introducing colours that relate not at all to the original subject matter, or it might be that you stick quite close. In this case, I have not, and I don't know whether I will use, I might not use at this stage, any colours that are into the earth colours, so yellow ochres, burnt siennas, like I've used in the original. Again, that's entirely up to you what colours you use for this. So I mean, I'm currently sort of using a more prismatic range of colours, in that I'm using colours as they are straight out of the tube, and thinking about a range of colours that would work around the colour wheel. So what I mean by that is sort of a yellow that sort of would be in the yellow position, a yellow also that starts to head towards the orange, a red that meets up with that, into a sort of an alizarin crimson sort of red, over to blues, then to greens, and then back to our yellow. So it's almost I've got a colour for every colour of the rainbow. If you're using a range like that, you're going to have the painting is going to be a lot more brighter than if you start to delve into a lot more of the earth colours, including the earth colours in there as well. And that's fine. If you want to use earth colours, that's fine. More so what I'm looking for and what I'm challenging you with this week is this technique of mixing, not over mixing the colours on the palette, of letting the mixing happen here with how you're picking up the paint and how you're placing it then down here onto the surface. So there we have it. As always, enjoy the process. Enjoy playing with the colours and how they come off your brush. And good luck. Until next time, take care.